The most dangerous man in New York forgot to breathe because of a song only dead women were supposed to remember. I did not know that when I stepped into the service hallway behind the ballroom at the Ashford Grand. I only knew my hands were shaking, my flats were killing me, and the borrowed black dress clung to my back under the hotel's overworked heat. The charity gala outside glittered like a world built for people who had never checked a bank app before buying groceries. Crystal chandeliers threw gold across marble floors. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed too loudly. Women in diamonds tilted their heads like they had been taught how to sparkle before they learned how to speak. And then there was me, Claire Bennett, 26 years old, filling in for a pianist who'd called out sick, trying not to think about the rent notice folded inside my purse like a threat. I had finished the opening set 20 minutes earlier, and my pulse still had not settled. Performance anxiety had followed me since I was 12, a small cruel thing that lived under my ribs and woke up whenever too many eyes turned my way. So I did what I always did when the panic started creeping up my throat. I slipped into the quiet, pressed one hand against the cool wall, and hummed. Softly, barely above a breath. A lullaby with no name. A melody I had carried my whole life, like something stitched into the lining of my skin. I did not remember who taught it to me. My foster mother used to smile strangely whenever she heard it, then change the subject. By the time I was old enough to ask questions that mattered, she was gone, and the song was all I had left of a past that never stayed still long enough to be touched. I closed my eyes and let the notes settle my heartbeat. Just 4 bars. That was all. 4 bars, and then the air changed. It is strange how quickly a room can feel different when power walks into it. I sensed him before I saw him, the way people sense lightning before thunder. The low murmur from the ballroom dimmed behind me. Footsteps stopped. A voice I could not hear clearly cut off in the middle of a sentence. I opened my eyes and found a man standing at the far end of the hallway, maybe 20 feet away, like he had stepped out of the shadows instead of through them. Tall, broad shoulders under a black dinner jacket that probably cost more than my car. Dark hair brushed back from a face too sharp to be called simply handsome. He looked carved, not born. His expression was controlled in that expensive, dangerous way some men wear like a second suit. But it was his eyes that held me. Pale gray, almost silver in the chandelier's spill, fixed on me with the kind of stillness that made my mouth go dry. He was not looking at me the way men usually looked at women in dresses. He was looking at me like I had opened a locked door inside his chest without permission. Neither of us moved. I remember the distant clink of glass from the ballroom, the faint scent of bourbon and cedar drifting from him, the pulse beating too hard in my throat. Then he crossed the hallway in slow, measured steps, each one impossibly calm, which somehow made him more frightening. He stopped close enough that I could see the small white scar near his jaw and the tension gathered behind his perfect composure. When he spoke, his voice was low, polished, unmistakably American with the faintest trace of old-world steel beneath it. "Sing it again," he said. I should have laughed, or apologized, or walked away. Instead, I just stared at him, my fingers tightening around the edge of my music folder. I do not know what scared me more, the fact that he sounded like a man used to being obeyed, or the fact that for one impossible second he sounded like he was asking me to hand back something he had lost a very long time ago. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" was the question in my head, but it never made it to my lips, because from the ballroom, someone whispered his name with the kind of fear people save for storms. And that was the moment I realized the man standing in front of me was Adrian Vale. Adrian Vale. Even if no one had whispered it, I would have known he was not a man people ignored. His name moved through the hallway like a draft under a locked door, quiet but impossible to miss. I had heard it before, usually in the half-serious way New Yorkers talk about people they will never meet. Real estate, shipping, donations to children's hospitals with his name nowhere on the wall. The kind of power that did not need publicity because it had already bought the room. Up close, he looked less like a rumor and more like a decision no one else got to question. His eyes stayed on my face, waiting, not impatient, not kind, just certain. "Sing it again," he said, softer this time. My throat tightened. "It is just a song," I managed. His jaw shifted, the smallest movement, but it changed something in the air between us. "No," he said, "it is not." The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, the hotel too warm, my pulse too loud. I should have walked back into the ballroom. I should have found the event coordinator, collected my check, and left through the employee entrance before midnight traffic turned Park Avenue into a parking lot. Instead, I stood there holding my music folder against my ribs like paper could protect me. I do not know where I learned it, I said. I have always known it. That was the truth, and somehow it sounded weaker than a lie. Adrian took one slow breath, and for the first time I saw it. Not fear exactly, but strain. Like my answer had reached inside him and twisted. Behind him, two men in dark suits appeared at the mouth of the hallway, both broad-shouldered, both pretending not to listen while clearly hearing every word. Adrian did not turn around. He did not need to. One slight lift of his hand, and they stopped where they were. The control in that tiny gesture sent a chill across my skin. "Who raised you, Claire Bennett?" he asked. My stomach dropped so fast it was almost physical. "You know my name." He looked at me for another beat, then at the folded program tucked under my arm, where the hotel had printed tonight's performers in neat gold script. "It is not difficult," he said, but I had the strange, sinking feeling that he had known it before reading it. My mouth went dry. "Foster parents," I said. "Mostly." His gaze sharpened on that one word. "Mostly." I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of my scuffed flats, the loose thread at the cuff of my sleeve, every small proof that I did not belong in the same frame as him. I was in the system until I was 8. Then the Bennetts adopted me. They passed away a few years ago. I heard my own voice flatten the facts into something manageable, the way people do when they have told the same sad story enough times to stop hearing it as sad. Adrian's expression did not change, but his eyes did. They moved over my face with unsettling focus, like he was searching for someone else beneath my skin. "Do you remember anything before that?" he asked. I almost said no out of habit. It was the easiest answer, the safe one, but the melody was still humming inside my chest, and something about the way he stood there, so controlled, and yet somehow one breath away from breaking, made honesty feel less dangerous than pretending. "Fragments," I admitted. A woman's hands. White curtains moving from an open window. A voice singing when it rained. Adrian went utterly still. Somewhere in the ballroom, a string quartet began the next number, bright and elegant, and completely wrong for the moment. He looked past me for half a second, as if he were seeing a room that no longer existed, then back at me with a quiet that felt heavier than anger. "Claire," he said, my name low and careful on his tongue, "I need you to come with me." I did not move. The words themselves were simple, almost polite, but nothing about Adrian Vale felt simple, and absolutely nothing about him felt polite in the ordinary sense of the word. "I need you to come with me." Like it was already decided. Like the only thing left was whether I understood that yet. My grip tightened on the music folder until the cardboard edge bit into my palm. I should say no, I told myself. I should step around him, return to the ballroom, find somebody from the hotel, stand under bright lights where rich people pretended terrible things could not happen in public. But fear is strange. Sometimes it tells you to run. Sometimes it tells you to stay very still and listen, because the person in front of you is the difference between confusion and disaster. "Why?" I asked. Adrian looked at me for a long second, and I had the unsettling feeling he was deciding how much truth I could survive in one night. "Because someone else heard you," he said at last. A cold ribbon slid down my spine. "Heard me do what?" "Hum a song you should not know." His voice never rose. That made it worse. There was no drama in him, no wasted force. He spoke the way bankers discussed numbers and surgeons discussed risk, precise and detached, as if the danger existed whether I believed in it or not. I gave a small, incredulous laugh that sounded nothing like me. "It is a lullaby. People hear songs every day. Not that one." The certainty in his answer made the hallway feel smaller. I glanced past him toward the ballroom entrance. Guests moved beyond the open doors in a blur of black tuxedos and glittering dresses. Waiters crossed with silver trays. A woman laughed too loudly near the champagne tower. The world looked perfectly normal, which somehow made my unease sharper. My phone was in my clutch. My rideshare app was one tap away. My tiny apartment in Queens was 40 minutes from here on a good night, closer to an hour if the midtown traffic was bad. Home suddenly felt both urgent and impossibly far. Adrian followed the direction of my gaze. "If you walk out of this hotel alone," he said, "you will not make it home without being followed." The matter-of-fact way he said it knocked the breath out of me more effectively than if he had tried to scare me. "Are you threatening me?" His eyes came back to mine, steady and silver, and tired in a way that did not match the rest of him. No, Claire. I am telling you that someone in that ballroom has been waiting 18 years for proof that a certain night left a witness behind. 18 years. The number struck something loose inside me. Not a memory exactly. More like the sensation of standing near the edge of one. Rain against glass. A woman's hand smoothing my hair. A melody in the dark. I swallowed hard. I do not know what you were talking about. I believe that, he said, and that was somehow the most frightening part. One of the men behind him stepped forward then, just half a pace, enough to remind me they were there. Adrian did not look back, but I saw his expression harden by a fraction. Wait outside, he said. The man stopped immediately and retreated. It was such a small exchange, but it changed everything. He was not posturing for me. This was simply how his world worked. People moved when he spoke. I looked down at my own hands. One still held the folder. The other had begun to tremble. I curled it into a fist. If I go with you, I said carefully, where are we going? Somewhere safe, Adrian replied. Safe. I almost laughed again. Coming from any other man, it would have sounded reassuring. Coming from him, it sounded like a door closing. He reached inside his jacket then, slow enough not to startle me, and pulled out something small and silver. A music box no bigger than his palm, old enough for the edges to be worn smooth. He pressed the latch. The lid opened with a soft metallic click. And then I heard it. My song. My lullaby. The same fragile melody rising into the hallway, thin and ghostly and impossible. My breath caught so hard it hurt. Adrian watched my face, not the music box, and when I looked up, the control in his expression had cracked just enough for me to see what lived underneath it. Grief. Recognition. And something that looked terrifyingly close to hope. Hope is a dangerous thing on a man like Adrian Vale. I saw that the second the melody faded. It did not soften him. It made him sharper, like every nerve in his body had turned toward one impossible thought and refused to look away. I could not breathe right. The tiny silver music box rested in his hand between us, delicate and old and completely at odds with the man holding it. I stared at it as if it might explain me to myself. Instead, it only made the hollow place in my chest ache harder. Where did you get that? I whispered. It was my mother's, Adrian said. The words landed quietly, but the weight in them was enormous. I looked up at him. He did not look away. For the first time since he stepped into that hallway, I understood that whatever this was, it was not a trick and it was not casual. This mattered to him in a way that had nothing to do with business or power, or the polished men waiting at a distance for his next command. My mother used to play it when I could not sleep, he said. He closed the lid with his thumb. The soft click sounded final. She played it for someone else too. My skin went cold beneath the heat of the hotel. The hallway, the ballroom, the music drifting in from the string quartet, all of it blurred at the edges. I had spent most of my life treating the missing parts of my childhood like a locked room I was better off not opening. A few strange dreams. A melody with no source. The feeling that rain meant more than weather. That was all. But now a man with eyes like winter was standing in front of me holding proof that my past had not disappeared. It had only been waiting. I do not understand, I said, and I hated how thin my voice sounded. Then let me help you, Adrian replied. His tone stayed controlled, but something underneath it had shifted. Not softer, more careful, as though I had become something fragile without meaning to. That should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me more. Men like him were not careful unless the stakes were enormous. A burst of laughter drifted from the ballroom, bright and oblivious. I flinched at it. Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. Claire, he said, low enough that only I could hear, if I am wrong, you leave in an hour and never see me again. If I am right, then walking away tonight would put you in danger you cannot even name yet. I searched his face for manipulation and found something more unnerving. Sincerity. Not the warm kind. The costly kind. The kind dragged out of a man who probably hated needing anything from anyone. I thought of my apartment in Astoria with its radiator that hissed all winter and the takeout menus stacked by the microwave. I thought of tomorrow morning, of coffee in a chipped mug, of pretending this night had not cracked something open in me. I wanted that version of my life back with a desperation that made my throat burn. But I also knew I would never be able to hear that lullaby again and not wonder whose voice had first put it into my bones. I swallowed. 1 hour, I said. Adrian studied me, then gave a single nod, solemn as a vow. 1 hour. He extended his hand, Not to grab me, not to rush me, only open and waiting. It was such a simple gesture, and somehow that was what made my pulse stumble. Behind him, the men in dark suits straightened. The hallway seemed to draw itself into new lines around his silence. I looked at his hand, then at the ballroom glittering over his shoulder, then back at the music box. Somewhere deep inside me, where memory lived without language, something whispered that I had already heard this song once before on a night when everything changed. And against every instinct that had kept me safe for years, I placed my hand in his. His hand was warm. That was the first thing I noticed as Adrian led me out of the service hallway and away from the ballroom's golden noise. Not rough, not possessive, just steady, like he already understood that the floor under me had shifted and I had not caught up yet. The two men who had been waiting near the entrance fell into step behind us without a word. No one stopped us. No one even looked too closely. That was the kind of power Adrian carried. He did not need to clear a path. The world cleared itself. We moved through a private corridor lined with cream wallpaper, brass sconces, and framed black and white photographs of old Manhattan, all polished elegance, and old money pretending it had never learned fear. My flats clicked softly against the marble. His shoes did not seem to make a sound at all. At the end of the corridor, a discreet elevator stood open, attended by a man in a dark suit who lowered his eyes the second Adrian approached. "Penthouse level," Adrian said. The man nodded once. That was all. No key card. No question. Just obedience wrapped in hotel manners. Inside the elevator, the doors slid shut with a whisper, and suddenly it was quiet enough for me to hear my own breathing again. The mirrored walls reflected all four of us back in fragments. Me, pale and overdressed in borrowed satin, clutching a folder I had forgotten how to let go of. Adrian, dark and composed, one hand in his pocket, the other still holding the small silver music box. The two men behind us, watchful and expressionless, like statues hired to intimidate. I stared at our reflections until Adrian caught me doing it. "They will wait outside," he said before I could ask. I looked over my shoulder. One of the men pressed a button for the top floor. The other stood with his hands clasped in front of him, gaze fixed ahead. Bodyguards, then, or something close enough that the difference no longer mattered. I turned back to Adrian. "You really think I am in danger because of a song?" His face remained unreadable, but his voice lost a degree of distance. "I think people have destroyed more for less." The elevator climbed smoothly. Floor numbers glowed one after another above the door. 21, 22, 23. My pulse seemed to count with them. I wanted to ask a dozen questions at once. Who was your mother? What happened 18 years ago? Why does it feel like some part of me already knows the answer? But the pressure in my chest would not let any of them out cleanly. Instead, I said the smallest thing. "I do not remember her face." Adrian's eyes shifted to me, sharp and immediate. "Whose face?" "The woman who sang it," I whispered. "I do not know if she was my mother. I do not know if she was anyone. I just know when I try to picture my childhood, there is always rain and white curtains in that song, but never a face." Something moved across his expression then, gone so quickly I almost missed it. Pain, maybe. Or recognition so old it had learned how to wear armor. The elevator doors opened onto a private foyer wrapped in silence. No hotel carpeting here. Just dark wood, smoked glass, and a single arrangement of white lilies set on a narrow table beneath a modern painting that looked expensive enough to feed a family for a year. The bodyguard stepped out first, checked the hallway, then stopped at a pair of double doors. Adrian turned to them. "No interruptions," he said. One of the men nodded. The other opened the doors for us. I walked into a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a kingdom built by someone who did not trust comfort unless it came in clean lines and guarded windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked Manhattan in sheets of light. The city spread beneath us like a circuit board, every cab and rooftop and glowing tower arranged in impossible precision. Somewhere down there, people were still laughing at the gala. Somewhere down there, my old life still existed. Adrian moved past me and set the silver music box on a black stone table near the fireplace. Then he turned, and for the first time since I met him, his voice lost its edge entirely. "Sit down, Claire," he said. "What I have to show you is going to change everything you think you know about yourself." I sat on the edge of a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than every piece of furniture in my apartment combined, and tried not to look like someone who had just followed the most feared man in the city into the sky because of a lullaby. The penthouse was too quiet. Not empty, but disciplined. Even the silence felt curated. A fire moved behind glass on the far wall, more light than heat. The city glowed beyond the windows in miles of gold and red, taxis and tail lights and office towers blinking against the dark. From up here, Manhattan looked harmless. Beautiful things usually do. Adrian did not sit right away. He crossed to a low cabinet built into the wall and keyed in a code I did not try to memorize. When the drawer slid open, he removed a flat black box and carried it to the stone table between us. I watched his hands as he opened it. They were steady, but the stillness in him had changed. Not weaker, more deliberate. Like every movement had to be chosen carefully or something underneath would break the surface. Inside the box were photographs, a faded hospital bracelet, and a small child's hair ribbon the color of cream. My throat tightened before I touched anything. Adrian took the bracelet first and placed it on the table. The plastic had yellowed with age. The printing had nearly worn away. St. Catherine's Medical Center. Infant female. No first name. The date meant nothing to me for one long second, and then everything inside me went cold. It was my birthday, or at least the date the state had always listed as my birthday. I looked up too fast. Adrian was watching me, not with triumph, not with satisfaction, but with the expression of a man standing in the ruins of something he had once loved. Your adoption records were sealed, he said. Most of the official files were erased after a fire at the county office. But this survived because my mother kept copies of everything that mattered. Why would your mother have my hospital bracelet? His gaze dropped briefly to the ribbon beside it. Because for almost 6 months, she thought you were staying with us. The words landed in pieces, too strange to absorb all at once. Staying with us. My fingers curled against my knees. I shook my head before I even understood what I was refusing. No. Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose, as if he had expected that. My mother ran several charities the public knew about, he said, and a dozen private ones they did not. Safe apartments, legal aid, emergency placements for women and children who needed to disappear quietly. 18 years ago, one of those women came to her in the middle of a storm with a little girl and nowhere left to go. My skin prickled so suddenly it hurt. Rain, white curtains, a song in the dark. I looked away from him and toward the windows, but the city had turned soft at the edges. I could not focus on it. You were saying I was that girl. I am saying my mother called you Claire Bell. His voice lowered on the name, almost reverent. A nickname she made up because you followed her through the house every morning wearing a little bell bracelet on your ankle. For one terrible second, the room tilted. Not visibly. Inside me, something old and buried shifted hard enough to steal my breath. I saw a flash of polished wood floors. A woman kneeling to button a sweater. A laugh, low and warm, followed by music. My hand flew to my chest. Adrian was beside me before I registered him moving. He did not touch me. He just crouched in front of the sofa, close enough that I could see concern strip the last of the polish from his expression. Breathe, he said quietly. Claire, look at me and breathe. I did. In for 4. Out for 4. Again. His voice never changed, and maybe that was what steadied me. When the dizziness eased, I looked down and realized my eyes had filled without my permission. I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by the softness of it. Adrian rose, but stayed near. You do not have to remember everything tonight, he said. I laughed once, uneven and bitter. That seems convenient, considering tonight I found out my whole life might have started in your mother's house. Something almost like regret passed over his face. Not convenient, he said. Catastrophic. The honesty in that word hit harder than comfort would have. I looked back at the table, at the ribbon, the bracelet, the photographs turned face down like they were saving their worst truth for last. My voice came out smaller than I intended. If I was there, why did I leave? Adrian went still again. When he answered, every word sounded measured against an old wound. Because someone betrayed my mother, Claire, and after that night, everyone she tried to protect had to disappear. The word betrayed did not hit me like a gunshot or a scream or any dramatic thing people write into stories to make pain sound beautiful. It landed softly, quietly, and maybe that was worse. Because soft things slip past your defenses. They settle in your chest before you realize they are there, and then suddenly they are everywhere. I looked at Adrian across the black stone table, at the photographs still turned face down, at the silver music box near his hand, at the city lights beyond the glass, and all I could think was that betrayal explained something my body had always known before my mind did. The unease. The way I hated locked rooms. The reason thunder made my heart race before rain even started. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared at the floor until the pattern in the rug blurred. Who betrayed her? I asked. Adrian did not answer right away. He moved back to the chair across from me and sat with the controlled grace of a man who had spent years teaching himself that stillness was safer than emotion. I do not know for certain, he said. Not then. Not completely. But someone close to her passed along the location of one of the safe houses. Someone she trusted enough not to question. My throat tightened. Safe house. Even now the words sounded unreal, like they belonged to a movie or the kind of headlines people skim while drinking coffee. Not to me. Not to a girl who spent Saturday mornings doing laundry in a basement with flickering lights and budgeting tips in her phone notes. Adrian leaned forward and turned over the first photograph. It showed a woman standing in front of a white townhouse with ivy climbing the brick. She was beautiful in the kind of way that made beauty feel incidental, as if her real power came from the calm in her face. Dark hair pinned loosely back, a long cream coat, eyes that even in a faded photograph looked kind enough to undo you. She had one hand on the shoulder of a boy around 10 years old. Adrian, younger, thin in that elegant way some children are before they grow into their height. On her other side stood a little girl in a yellow raincoat, half turned away from the camera, one hand tucked into the woman's coat pocket as if she belonged there. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. The room fell away. Yellow. I knew that coat. Not from memory exactly. From feeling. The slick sound of the fabric when I moved. The rubber smell of wet rain boots lined up by a door. I pressed a hand over my mouth. Adrian did not speak. He let the silence do what it needed to do. I reached for the photograph with unsteady fingers. The little girl's face was blurred from motion, but there was a bell charm at her ankle, tiny and silver, caught by the flash. A soundless crack split through me. I had dreamed that bell my whole life. I used to wake up hearing it and think it was a car alarm outside or pipes rattling in the wall. I looked up at Adrian, and the expression on his face made my chest ache in a completely different way. He was not watching to see whether I believed him. He was watching like every piece of this cost him something too. That was me, I whispered. Yes. The word came out equally soft. Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and immediate. I hated crying in front of people, hated the helplessness of it. But this was not sadness exactly. It was recognition colliding with grief. It was my past stepping out of the dark and asking why I had taken so long. What happened that night? I asked. Adrian's jaw flexed once. A storm rolled in after. Midnight, he said. My mother had 3 women and 2 children in the house. You were the youngest. I remember because she carried you when the thunder got loud and you would not stop crying until she sang. The room tilted again, but this time memory came with it. A woman's perfume, clean linen, candlelight trembling against white curtains. Arms around me that did not belong to any mother I could name. My eyes closed on instinct. When I opened them, Adrian was still there, still impossibly composed, but his voice had roughened at the edges. She moved everyone before dawn. Separate cars, separate routes, new names. She thought if she scattered people fast enough, it would keep them alive. Did it? For some of them, he said. Then he looked at the photograph in my hands as though it could reopen a grave. For my mother, no? I stared at him, every nerve in me suddenly still. And in that terrible stillness, I realized this was not just my lost beginning. It was the night he lost everything. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fire behind the glass gave off a low amber glow. The city beyond the windows kept moving like nothing sacred had just been dragged back from the dead. I sat there with the photograph in my hands and felt grief expanding in places I did not know were hollow. Not only for the woman in the picture, not only for the child in the yellow raincoat, for the years in between, for all the birthdays that had passed without context. For every time I had looked in the mirror and wondered why my own face sometimes felt borrowed. Adrian stood and crossed to the windows, one hand slipping into the pocket of his trousers, the other braced lightly against the glass. From behind, he looked carved out of control. Perfect lines, straight shoulders. A man the whole city would call untouchable. But now I knew better. He was not untouchable. He was simply a man who had learned to build an empire around the shape of an old loss. Did you know it was me before tonight? I asked. My voice sounded strange in the room. Too small. Too human. Adrian stared out over Manhattan a second longer before answering. No. I knew there had been a child who vanished after that night. I knew my mother never stopped trying to track where some of them went. But the files were fragmented. Names changed. Records disappeared. He turned then, and the look in his eyes made my chest tighten all over again. I only knew when I heard you. Something about that should have sounded impossible. Instead, it felt like the only honest thing left. I looked down at the photograph again. The woman in cream. The little boy at her side. The child I had once been standing so close to a life I could not remember. Why did no one tell me? Adrian came back to the table, slower this time, as if he understood that every answer landed like weight. Because the people who took you from that life were trying to keep you alive, he said. And because eventually, survival starts to look a lot like silence. I let that settle. It felt true in the way the hardest things usually do. My foster records had always been strange. Too clean in some places. Too missing in others. Questions rerouted. Agencies merged. Paperwork delayed. I used to think it was ordinary neglect, the kind that happens when children without money get sorted through systems built to forget them. Now I wondered if someone had been helping me disappear all along. My phone buzzed suddenly inside my clutch. The sound cut through the room like a wire pulled too tight. I flinched. Adrian's gaze dropped instantly to the bag in my lap. He did not move toward me. He only said, "Answer it on speaker." Every nerve in me went alert. Why? Because almost no one should know where you are right now, he said. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. My stomach turned over. I hit accept with a thumb that did not feel entirely steady and held the phone between us. Hello. For a second, there was only static. Then an older woman's voice, thin with panic, filled the room. Claire. It was Margaret, my foster mother's sister. The closest thing to family I had left. Relief hit first. Fast and stupid and bright. Aunt Margaret, I said, too quickly. How did you know to call me? A pause. Too long. Adrian's expression changed before my own thoughts caught up. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that comes when a pattern you feared finally reveals itself. Claire, Margaret said, and her voice dropped to a whisper that shook at the edges. You need to listen to me very carefully. If anyone asks, you never heard that song from me. The blood drained from my face. My fingers went cold around the phone. Adrian did not speak. He just held my gaze with that terrible, steady stillness of his while the last safe corner of my old life quietly caught fire. Aunt Margaret, I said, barely able to force the words out. What are you talking about? I heard her inhale. Then, somewhere behind her, a door opened, and someone in the room with us stopped being a memory and became a threat. The sound behind Aunt Margaret was small, just a door opening somewhere in the background. But it changed everything. You do not spend your whole life feeling vaguely unsafe without learning the difference between ordinary noise and the kind that makes your body go still before your mind understands why. My fingers tightened around the phone. Adrian had not moved, yet the room felt charged with him, every line of his body sharpened by attention. Margaret, I said, trying to keep my voice level and failing. Who is there? Her breathing turned ragged over the speaker. Claire, she whispered, I never wanted this to find you. I thought if we stayed quiet long enough, it would pass. Nothing in Adrian's face changed, but his eyes did. They darkened, focus narrowing with the cold precision of a man who had just heard a familiar lie. Stay on the line, he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, impossible to ignore. Aunt Margaret made a soft sound, like she had only just realized I was not alone. Is he with you? She asked. I looked at Adrian. He stood near the table, one hand resting beside the music box, the city burning gold behind him. Yes, I said. Another pause. Then her voice broke in a way I had never heard before. Good. The word landed harder than panic would have. I sat straighter on the sofa, pulse hammering against my ribs. Margaret had never trusted powerful men, never trusted expensive suits or polished manners or people who knew how to make others obey. When my foster mother died, Margaret was the one who told me to keep my head down, pay cash when I could, and never let anybody make me feel owned. For her to sound relieved that I was with Adrian Vale meant the danger was bigger than the fear he inspired. Tell me what is happening, I said. Through the phone, I heard another faint sound. Footsteps, maybe. or floorboards settling. Margaret lowered her voice until I had to strain to catch it. Your foster mother did not take you by accident, Claire. She took you because a woman begged her to. I felt the room go thin around me. Adrian did not interrupt. He only watched my face with that terrible stillness of his, as if he already knew what was coming and hated that I had to hear it this way. A woman from the house, Margaret continued. Not the one in the photograph. Another one. She brought you to us before sunrise with papers, cash, and a warning that if anyone ever asked questions, we were to say you had come through the system like any other child. She said your name could never stay attached to that night. My mouth went dry. Why did you never tell me? Because your mother made me promise. The words were out before I could stop them. Margaret inhaled sharply. I am sorry, sweetheart, she said. Your foster mother. Your foster mother. But the damage was done. The word hung between us, raw and unmistakable. My mother. Not foster. Not temporary. Not borrowed. Something inside me seemed to split open quietly, like a seam finally giving way after years of strain. I looked down at my hands and barely recognized them. Adrian took one step closer. Not enough to crowd me. Just enough that his presence felt like a wall between me and the world tilting under my feet. Margaret kept talking, faster now, like she was running out of courage. We were told someone inside the organization had been feeding names, addresses, routes, the safe houses, the transfers, everything. We were told that if the wrong people ever realized you were alive, they would come looking for what you remembered. I closed my eyes for 1 second. White curtains, rain, a woman singing, a bell at my ankle. When I opened them again, Adrian was already watching me as if memory itself had a sound, and he was listening for it. Did my mother know who betrayed them? I asked. Margaret went silent. Then, very softly, she said, I think she did. Adrian's expression changed with brutal subtlety, like a blade turning in the light. Who? He asked. It was the first time he had spoken directly into the call, and even through the speaker, Aunt Margaret seemed to recoil from the force of his calm. I do not know for sure, she whispered. I only know the name your mother wrote down before she burned the rest. My heart slammed once against my ribs. Adrian's voice dropped to something so quiet, it was almost gentle. Say it. And in the silence that followed, I understood with perfect clarity that whatever came next would not just change my past. It would decide who Adrian Vale became after tonight.